Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads for 6 books, possibly my last recent reads wrap up for the year. There'll be at least one more video which will be my top reads of 2023. So the 6 books I've read this week, or the last couple of weeks: Orbital by Samantha Harvey, Isdal by Suzannah Dickey, Russian author Kirill Kobrin, 11 Prague Corpses, translated by Veronica Lakatova. Alex Kovacs, British author, The Currency of Paper. American author Kate Zambreno, To Write As If Already Dead. And finally, Austrian author Gert, The Distant Sounds, translated by Jean M. Snook. And 3 of these books, which are these 3, the Jonke, the Kobrin and the Kovacs, are all published by Dickey Archive. And I believe that To Write As If Already Dead was also published by Dickey Archive, although the copy I've got is published by Columbia University Press. So as you can see, I've had a bit of a binge on Dickey Archive titles. I've got 2 more to read early next year. One of them doesn't actually arrive here till the first week of January, which is a shame because that's the one I was most wanted to read. Anyway, so I'm going to start with Samantha Harvey's Orbital. Now, I'm very taken with the work of Samantha Harvey, to the extent that I actually used a quote of hers from one of her books as an epigram in my current novel, The Death of the Author in Triplicate. So she holds a dear place in my literary head, and this is her latest novel, came out within the last month. And is both pleasing and also slightly disappointing, I have to say. So there are 6 astronauts, crew members of the International Space Station, which orbits the Earth 16 times a day. But because of the rotation of the Earth and its own orbit around the Sun, they're getting a different angle on each time they pass over the Earth in these 16 times. And it's very much a contemplative, meditative novel about, gazing upon Earth from outside and what that says about our lives, our existence, our place in the cosmos, and what we're doing to our planet. We do go into the lives of the 6 astronauts a little bit because, if you're going to commit to be an astronaut, what you have to go through, the training and all the other rigours, you kind of have to almost want to do it from childhood. It's not a sideways career move from something else. So we do sort of glimpse into these astronauts' connections to space and space travel from their childhoods, but it's really this sort of observational, imagistic, metaphorical response to what they're seeing outside of the portholes on the space station. There is a small plot line of a typhoon. They've been asked to follow and track the course of a typhoon that's going to hit the Philippines and areas around there. But it's really, as I say, much more a sort of meditative, contemplative book. And although the writing is beautiful and lush, the nature of writing about the cosmos and space and scale is sort of ineffable. So her word choices are beautiful, and yet they're also something slightly unsatisfactory about it. It doesn't, how do we know if that encapsulates what it's really like? I assume Samantha Harvey has not been up in the International Space Station. Very few human beings have seen Earth from space. And a lot of those are military men, from NASA, who, bless them, probably don't have the creative vocabulary and the literary mindedness and the metaphorical mindedness to encapsulate that. So as a reading experience, it's beautiful, but there's something nagging at the back of me that you can't quite tie this down. And in a way, the chapters are divided into these 16 orbits. And so I felt that they were extended metaphors as she's describing the view through the porthole and the view of Earth and the different places and continents. I felt that sort of was a little repetitive as an extended metaphor, and yet the best bits of writing were much simpler. Where, for example, when they're asked to sort of what can they see about this typhoon, so they all go to the portholes, all 6 of the crew. And she describes it very simply as like moths to a flame. And I found that much more satisfying somehow, much more simpler, as I say. The interesting thing, I think the point that she's making is, on the one hand, you know, that what you're viewing when you're looking out into space and at the Earth and everything is nature. You know, this has all been, you know, made without mankind's input. All the planets, all the stars, the nature of space and all of that. And yet you can also detect man's hand in this, such as all the space junk that's circulating around the Earth from previous space missions, and also the effect on the Earth itself. You know, this is a super typhoon that they're tracking. You know, the sort of dense forest fires, and you know the harm that man is doing to its own planet, which they can perceive and they can sense from, you know, deepest, or not deepest, but you know, from outside the Earth looking in. That man's imprint on the planet in a destructive way is absolutely observable, and I thought that was really good. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. And on to Isdal by Samantha Dickey. Now this is a book of poetry, although it's really prose poetry. And it's dealing, again, like Eliza Clark's book Penance, although I felt this was more satisfactory. It's dealing with, you know, why are we so attracted to true crime stories? Why is it such a growth industry? Why does it have huge audiences? Why is it so sexy, really? And she too has 2 blog hosts who are on the track of this 1970s unsolved case from Norway of a woman in her 30s who was murdered and burnt. Even her own identity really has not been tracked down, because she herself was leading a life of mystery and sort of false trails even before she was killed. And these 2 hosts are being sort of, or the man is sort of trying to flirt with the woman as sort of part of their shtick. She's not really having it. And that sort of feeds into the wider thing about violence against women and male attitudes towards women. That obviously Isdal, the victim here, suffered from. So it's very much queering, you know, the taste, really, of us being so into true crime. I have to say, I enjoyed it while I read it, but then it hasn't stuck with me at all. I did prefer it to Eliza Clark's Penance, which I found really unsatisfactory. This I found more satisfactory. Maybe because it's poetry, I don't know. It was less preachy. I'll post the link to my review of Eliza Clark's book. So there's not much more to say about this, really. Other than, you know, there's a really interesting thing where it quotes a 1944 study, psychological study, where a short film was made with a large triangle, a small triangle and a circle, just geometric shapes, no features, and their movements around the screen and sort of, you know, coming together, moving apart and stuff. And how many of the respondents viewing this genderised them, that the triangles were men and the circle was a woman, and that there was some sort of, you know, male seduction or worse than seduction moves on this, you know, supposedly neutral geometric shapes, and you know, as I say, we all tended to gender everything. So I thought that was really interesting and a point well made. But as I say, it hasn't really stuck with me at all. When I was flicking through, you know, this evening before I turned the record button on the camera, I couldn't really recall any of the sort of the detail, really. So I give it 4 stars. And on to The Distant Sound by Gert Jonke. So Gert Jonke's an author I've read before, really like his work. The 2 books I read of his before were much shorter than this. I mean, this is quite a chunky novel. And I think I found it surprising, because the opening of this book is very much in the vein of the other 2 books of his I read. It's really dense prose, but it's beautiful sort of descriptions and metaphors of the view of part of a city outside this guy's window, but also the sounds. It's really, really good. And this character goes to bed one evening in his apartment and wakes up, and all sorts of strange things are there, like a wardrobe is moved outside his front door of his apartment. And gradually it dawns on him that he's somehow in an asylum, because he's told by the doctors that he tried to commit suicide. he has no memory of this at all. But he's determined that, he has to escape, and he escapes. And all of that I really enjoyed. I thought it was fabulous stuff. And then we go into the rest of the book, which seemed a sort of journey of sort of randomness. He hooks up with a sort of performance troupe. They go on a long train journey. And again, the descriptions of the scenery outside the train are stunning. He has this, he sort of is a woman seduced him in the asylum and presented herself as a carer, as a nurse, and he wants to find her again. And so the one fact about her life she told him was her favourite cafe in one of the main stations in the city. So he goes and hangs out there, and he's sort of everyone is reading a paper, which makes it hard for him to see anybody who's sat down. So all he can do is really see the new people as they enter the cafe. And this guy he's sat next to offers to share his newspaper with him, and starts reading out a really interestingly and well-written thing about how this company have bought the land rights to the river that runs through the city, because they want to develop it, they want to build on it. And in order to do that, they're going to divert the river to run through the poorer sections of the city and sweep them away. And those people have sort of, in the poor sections, have sort of united and rallied to oppose this. And a lawyer who represents them sort of says, well, you only have the rights to build on the river, not on the riverbed. And if you divert the water from the river, so there's no longer any water where you want to build, it's no longer a riverbed because there's no river atop of it. So it's a really... But again, it's all a bit sort of random and unrooted and unanchored. And it's only right towards the end when there's sort of political upheaval and the people are out in the streets parading, where we get, it's called the distant sound. And it's only towards the end that we really get to a fantastic description of a certain... I'm not going to spoil it for you, but a sound that permeates, in a way, it's the soundtrack of this revolution of people. And it's a really interesting thing causing this sound and the way it's written about. And then we sort of finally sort of revert to a hint of if he tried to kill himself as the people in the asylum, diagnosed, then we sort of return to that. So I didn't think the book as a whole was terribly effective, but there's some wonderful sort of set pieces and virtuoso writing in it, which is why I say it's very different from his other two books of his that I've read, which are conceptually really tight, really tight. This was quite loose and in some places quite flabby, but still highly enjoyable. 4 stars. And on to Kirill Kobrin, 11 Prague Corpses. So I was hoping this was going to be one novel dealing with 11 corpses, murder victims, with one detective or team of detectives looking into solving it. It's not at all, it's 10 short stories. Admittedly, most of them, the person who's sort of solving the crimes, although he's not a detective, he's an obituary writer in a newspaper. Then halfway through this, he changes his job to be like an agent for art, to sell Czech modernist artists who are sort of back in fashion. So he permeates most of the stories, but he doesn't like Prague. He's a Russian, he's from Russia. He's in Prague. He sees Prague as the worst of sort of the old former communist elements and its people, very sort of downtrodden, no sort of life or lustre, having then been sort of merging with the influx of sort of Western capitalism, and how empty and soulless that is. So he doesn't like this. He likes the architecture of the city, but he doesn't like the people that he's forced to, cheek by jowl, to reside in it. And I found that pretty unsavoury, really. The tone of the book was fairly misanthropic. He's in this book, he's channeling G.K. Chesterton, Edgar Allan Poe, although without the supernaturalism. These slightly weird tales of how these people ended up murdered. a lot of the stuff is about being in Prague and being Russian, and it's sort of almost Columbo-like by the end, having not really led you by the nose, he suddenly drops in the key thing that unravels the case. And we get 2 stories that mention uploading to Pornhub. The last story is awful because it's very sort of a caricature version of Islamic fundamentalism, which was highly predictable. If I could sum it up, there was one story called CCTV, which has a really intriguing premise that sort of chain stores, global chain stores, clothes, food, whatever, they share their CCTV data for the positive reasons of they can see regular customers, who are good, who they give them an extra level of service, and also obviously to combat shoplifters. So across all of Europe, all these chain stores are sharing this data, which I think is a really interesting idea. It works by facial recognition, obviously, but then it gets a bit sort of corrupted for illicit use, and it goes very Powell Pressburger Peeping Tom in a fairly unsavoury way, and that sums up this book, that there's a lot of interesting stuff to start off these stories, but then they go a bit sort of a bit Pete Tong, a bit wrong, a bit unsavoury. So I didn't really enjoy this at all, I'm afraid. 2.5 stars. And then we get To Write As If Already Dead by Kate Zambreno. Now this is whip crack smart. I really enjoyed this, 5 stars. It's in 2 parts. So the first is she's a book blogger. I would say that this is very much on the sort of cusp of autofiction. It's part autofiction, part essay. The essay is she's writing an essay. She's been commissioned to write an essay on this book, To the Friend Who Did Not Save My Life, by French author Harvey, which I haven't read. I bought it on the strength of reading this, so I'm going to read this next year. So she's commissioned to write an essay on this, and what this book is Gert has contracted AIDS, and he writes this novel, and is basically, in doing so, it's a sort of paper-thin cipher for Michel Foucault, who died of AIDS, but that was covered up at the time because France doesn't have a pop culture. We all go mad over pop singers and sports people. France doesn't do that. France goes mad over its intellectuals and will do anything to protect their reputation. Intellectuals and academics are pop stars in France. And I've talked about that at length in my novel, in my review of Laurent Binet's wonderful novel, The Seventh Function of Language, and I'll post a link to that. And the scandal of this novel when it came out is that Gert basically revealed that Foucault died of AIDS. Foucault was his mentor. They were both gay, and in the end, Gert died of AIDS as well. So it caused a huge scandal, and Kate Zambreno is struggling to write this essay. She has a young child. Gert's other book that came after his fame was basically chronicling his dying days. So he had a deadline. He was desperate to finish everything he wanted to write before he died. In the same way that William Gaddis's book, Agape, was also written against the clock as he was dying. She too has a deadline. She's been given the deadline by her publishers, and she's really struggling to write it because, as I say, her life of having a young child. So when she wants to travel to Paris to do some research in person, she's with the child and her husband, and it's just impossible with a young child to actually go and do research. So in the end, they go to child-centred stuff. So she's sort of mirroring, even though she says, she's not dying of AIDS, she's not dying, although she does have many health problems herself. But she too is labouring under a deadline, and the deadline she's labouring under is that of being a woman and a mother in our culture, whereas Gert in the 80s was, being gay and being, a persecuted minority, particularly during the AIDS crisis. And the other thing she's looking at is the nature of friendship, because Guibé was a friend of Foucault and was, accused of betraying him. The first part of this Zambreno book is she has a book blog and attracts a few, regular commenters, and they form a little community online. And this female writer comes to the blog and leaves comments, and they form a very strong online bond where they talk about literature, and eventually it spills over into their private lives. But the other woman is very keen to preserve her anonymity because she is an outsider artist, this other woman. And Zambreno is racked by, wanting to talk about the nature of friendship. And, would she be betraying her friend by talking about her in the book? And I felt slightly frustrated because Zambreno never reveals who this writer is, because she talks about one of her books without giving the title. And it sounds really interesting. I really want to read it, but I don't know the author and I don't know the book title. So that first part is about art, outsider art, You might be an outsider, you might be resistant to commercial pressures in the making of your art, but you still need an audience. You still, art demands to be viewed or read or heard or whatever. Otherwise, it's self-indulgent. It's for the self, and that is one of the paradoxes at the heart of sort of art, and particularly outsider art. So I just thought there was a lot of whip-crack smart observation in here about friendship, about art. About motherhood and childhood, about creating art in society, all these things. I really, really enjoyed it. I got several books that I want to read, not just this one. This is the one I've actually bought. So, 5 stars. And on to Alex Kovacs, The Currency of Paper, which was published when? About 2013, something like that. Yeah, 2013. And this is that most odd thing. This is a socialist book. So a man called Maximilian, who has come from a fairly poverty-strewn childhood, is working in a printer's shop and absolutely hates everything about the routine, mind-numbing nature of his work. And indeed the epigram at the start of it is from Marx about the alienation of labour. And he determines he's going to break free of all this sort of stratified, preordained stuff about life, and he turns his skills and his access to photocopiers to basically become a counterfeiter, hence the currency of paper. And he's so successful at this that he can give up his wage slave life, his working stiff life, and resolves on a life of 50 years of artistic pursuit. And it's a book really about, again, the nature of art and the contradictions of art, because he would like to wreak social change of attitudes. He would like everybody else to be able to free themselves from wage and consumer slavery as he himself has done. But again, you need to have an audience for that. You need to reach people. You need to be able to bring them along with you. And most of his art is never even seen. At which point it becomes bourgeois, self-indulgent, all the things I was saying in relation to the Zambreno book. So this is the contradiction at the heart of art. Can art ever be political? And if it is, you need money. Now, his seed money, as it were, was all counterfeit. It was all self-made money, literally. He rendered the banknotes. But everything he does, he has the leisure time to do it because he doesn't have to work for a living. He could buy all his materials, and at times he tries to justify. He tries to make distinctions between he's remaining true and morally pure, and he isn't at all. He is almost playing at it. He has an incredible work ethic. He's working 8 to 12 hours a day on these projects, but partly in the knowledge that they probably won't ever be seen. And therefore it's really stroking his own ego or his own intellectual curiosity, but with reference to nobody else. This isn't for sharing. So some of the projects he does, he has a sort of a radio station. He has an employment agency. He has a sort of illicit anonymous postcard campaign. He has a book of essays that he writes. So, he makes a film, he makes a sound collage or concrete sound thing. So every single art form, say for dance, he indulges in, but in it, as I say, apart as a dilettante, and yet not a dilettante because he's pouring so much time and energy into it, so he can't be accused of playing at it. But again, without a goal at the end of it, it is dilettantism. When he's in his 50s, he's still a virgin, and he discovers sex. And he and his partner, he's basically seduced by this harpsichord player, and they have fantasies, they share fantasies, and the ironic thing is that these fantasies of the workaday life, they each are fulfilling roles that that he's wanted to escape from in the first place, but he's happy to do it in the context of receiving the exchange of sex for it. So I thought that was quite good. And then when she leaves him, she disappears as much as he disappears from various other things. He then absolutely commodifies sex by paying for prostitutes. So it's very sly. It is a bit sort of one-paced, one-tracked. I mean, on the one hand, it is trying to put me on the bones of, alienation of labour and how to avoid that. But in doing so, we each are making individual rebellions against it, not class and societal rebellions against it. In that sense, it's quite anarchistic. The artist is more anarchist than socialist, unless you're making art in a collective. So it's not even true to its sort of socialist pretensions in many ways. But, it's good fun. It was I can't say it's refreshing to read a socialist novel. I mean, I studied all of that stuff when I was at university, so it's not new to me. But it was a bit of a jolt. I wasn't expecting it. The stuff that you read, and with what's going on in America, where anything with a whiff of socialism or communism, even though they don't understand what those words mean, causes all sorts of ructions in the culture wars. I found it quite refreshing, really, to be confronted with the book. I'm not going to say you have to read this book, it's going to change your outlook, it's going to change your politics, it's going to change your approach to art. No, not at all. It was just sort of quite satisfying about it. 4 stars. So there we have it. As I say, that's probably my last reading wrap-up for the year. Because I'm still doing my own novel, I'm not reading as much. There's going to be at least one more book I'll finish before the year end, maybe 2. Which case I'll probably talk about them in the early new year. So if you've already started making tracks for the festive period, and you're like me, you're now on leave from work, I wish you all a good festive period. Do keep an eye out for my favourite reads of 2023. But if not, I'd say have a great festive period, and here's to 2024.